Hello, my name is Rusty, and this is my first attempt at a YouTube channel. I guess you could call it Wrestling with Rusty. I'll be talking about wrestling, pro wrestling that is, and various other issues concerning the wrestling industry, and I'm sorry to start out on a negative standpoint, but here I go. Some of you are interested in getting into pro wrestling, and you might be so interested in getting into it that you choose a wrestling school. But choosing a wrestling school is harder than you might think. In later videos, I'll tell you why, how I got my background and different things of that nature. But for this video, I'll just stick to the wrestling schools, and in a later video, talk to you about other reasons that I'm a big wrestling fan. I've been a wrestling fan for 45 years. I'm 48 years old. That makes me a wrestling fan since age 3. And I've met a lot of people in the business, and not just at autograph signings, but at various other places and also behind the scenes. In 2001, I worked as a bad guy manager, and various other things behind the scenes in radio and TV production. So I know what I'm talking about. But back to the point of this video, which is how to choose a pro wrestling school. And now there are a lot of schools around. Anybody can teach you a few moves, and how to get started, how to fall, how to call a match, maybe different things like that. But what they can't teach you is how to deal with the politics of the business and how to deal with dressing room etiquette and stuff like that. Why should you spend your hard-earned money trying to learn how to go to wrestling school from somebody who was just a jobber, or as they call them nowadays, enhancement talent, which is a more politically correct name for a jobber? Back in my day, we call them job guys or jobbers. But I'll try to refrain from doing that in these videos. I hope I didn't offend anybody. But my point is, you need to go, if you're going to spend your hard-earned money, you need to first have a backup plan. As J.J. Dillon once said, have a backup plan for the backup plan. Meaning that no matter how good you are or how good you think you are, the reality is a career in pro wrestling is not a guarantee. Sure, there's not a guarantee in any aspect of life, but especially not in pro wrestling. Terry Funk once said, if you want to get in the wrestling business, it's probably easier to hit the lottery than get in the wrestling business these days. But if you're going to do it the right way. And part of doing it the right way is go to a pro wrestling school. Somebody that you've heard of before, not just because there's a lot of job guys or enhancement guys who get a ring and get a couple of trainers and put a sign out or whatever it is they do to attract customers, and will tell you that they can teach you how to be a pro wrestler. The problem with that theory is, if they were so great on teaching people to be a pro wrestler, they wouldn't be job guys or enhancement talent. You would have heard of them. Which brings me back to my original point, that if you're going to go to a wrestling school and spend several $1,000s training to be a pro wrestler, then why not get trained by somebody who's been there? The Funking Conservatory, owned by Dory Funk Jr. in, I think it's Clearwater, Florida, somewhere there in Florida. You guys can search it on the internet. Is a good place to go. The Monster Factory in Paulsboro, 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 New Jersey, about 15 minutes from the Philadelphia airport. For those of you who don't know, is another top school to go to. Danny Cage is a wrestler that took over for Larry Sharp. Now, you might not have heard of Danny Cage, but Danny Cage trained under Larry Sharp, and everybody's heard of Playboy Larry Sharp. So that's another reason why you should go to a top school like the Monster Factory or the Funking Conservatory, because everybody's heard of Larry Sharp for the Monster Factory, and everybody's heard of Dory Funk Jr. for the fucking conservatory. Another example, Harley Race's School, World League Wrestling Academy out in Kansas City is another example. And Bubba Ray Dudley's camp in Florida. I don't know the name of the school. But the point is, all of the people that I mentioned here you've heard of before. But there's a lot of people out there that you haven't heard of that couldn't even get their own self booked with a major company. So why should you give them several $1,000s, and not just of your money, but of your time and hopes that you might be in the wrestling business? How are they going to get you in the wrestling business if they couldn't even get themselves a good job in the wrestling business? Now, this other part I'm going to talk about is not all the way about a wrestling school, but it'll give you an example. I'm sure most of you have heard of High Spots, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, highspots.com, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, but they have all kind of wrestling gear and wrestling merchandise and things of that nature. They also have a wrestling school, but they've only turned out 2 wrestlers, one of them being Tessa Blanchard, who would have made it in the wrestling business regardless of whether she trained at High Spots or not, because her last name is Blanchard. Anytime you've got name recognition like Tully Blanchard's daughter, a moron can train you, a monkey can train you, and you're going to get in the wrestling business because your last name is Blanchard. Part of getting in the wrestling business is knowing who to talk to and who to get advice from. And when your last name's Blanchard, it doesn't matter who trains you because you're going to get a job eventually. And she did. She's been to Japan and some other stuff. Sure, and she's even done some work for WWE now. And the other person that High Spots got helped get some training that eventually went on to get a job was Cedric Alexander, that's now in WWE, unless he's been released by the time of this video. The way WWE goes, Cedric might have been released from WWE before any of you hear this video. But this video is recorded on December 1st, 2017. I should have said that in the beginning. I got a lot of rough edges. This is my first YouTube video, so please forgive me. But the point I'm trying to make is, other than those 2 people, High Spots has not done nothing to help anybody. In fact, High Spots, with that $5 wrestling that used to be around, made fun of the wrestling business, much like Combat Zone Wrestling and Backyard Wrestling and that old Wrestling with Death TV show. Not that High Spots did those shows, but I'm just saying, anybody who makes fun of the business, I have a problem with it. I said I wasn't going to go into my history in regards to wrestling here, but I guess I should. I grew up in the wrestling business in Charlotte, North Carolina. I now live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I was fortunate enough to meet Jackie Crockett, who later became WCW cameraman. But prior to that, he was one-fifth owner of Jim Crockett Promotions, which was the only NWA promotion at the time that was worth a damn, in my opinion, because they treated wrestling with old school respect. And in later videos, I'll talk to you about why the Crockett's went out of business many years ago, and it's been documented on DVDs hundreds of times. But I'll give you my opinion. But back to the people who make fun of the business. I have no respect for anybody like High Spots or anybody else that makes fun of the business. And in High Spots' case, with this $5 wrestling hokey bullshit. Now, a friend of mine, Charles Freight Train Stevenson, who has had some mental disabilities, or still does, was their $5 champion. Now, technically, $5 wrestling is no longer in business, thank God. But I hear through the grapevine that they're going to do supposedly one more show with the $5 guys, but not call it $5 wrestling. And now, my buddy Freight Train, he wants to get in the wrestling business so bad, he'll do the hokey shit. You might say, well, what else do I mean by hokey shit? Hokey shit is like having a cheeseburger eating contest, or wrestling with a guy in a bear costume that's dressed up like you'd see at an amusement park. Those kind of things, that's not wrestling. That's making fun of the business. If you're going to get in this business, you need to treat this business with respect and as a privilege, an honor, because you're not guaranteed a job in this business in the first place. Yes, this is entertainment, and you can get in a little bit easier than you can back in my day, some 45 years ago. But you still need to treat it with dignity and respect, because nobody owes you a job. Nobody owes you anything in life, but they especially don't owe you a job in the wrestling business. So therefore, you're more likely to get into the wrestling business if you treat it with respect and honor, instead of treating it like a damn comedy routine, like Combat Zone Wrestling or High Spots $5 Wrestling. And in the case of the Freight Train, even though he no longer speaks to me, because I told him he was making fun of the business and that the people at High Spots were using his mental disabilities and taking advantage of him, and not really trying to help him get into the wrestling business, just using him as a comedy act. I gotta say, I still love him and have a lot of respect for him. I'm not trying to bash Freight Train, but I'm just saying, if you are a person that cannot speak on the microphone or cannot speak in public where people can understand you, that's the first thing you need to decide before you spend several $1,000s to go to a wrestling school. Because if you can't talk on the microphone, it doesn't matter how good you are in the wrestling ring. Nobody's going to give you a job in the big time. You'll be relegated to these small time independent promotions who sometimes don't have good equipment, which increase your chances of getting hurt permanently. And in case you don't know, I'm in a wheelchair, not because of the wrestling industry. I have cerebral palsy, or CP, sometimes referred to as cerebral palsy, but that's not the right way to pronounce it. It's cerebral palsy. And going to wrestling and meeting some of the people that I have in the past allowed me to forget my troubles and having cerebral palsy all my life for 48 years. And I've been a wrestling fan for 45 of those years. So, long story short, what I'm saying is investigate, talk to people, talk to others. If you've never heard of somebody, don't go give them your money for a wrestling school. Find out who they've graduated and where their students that they've graduated are working. If their students are not working in big time promotions that you've heard of, don't give them 10 cents, let alone several $1,000s. So be careful who you give your money to. And if you have to search, and don't give them your money right away either. Tell them that you'll think about it and call them back in a week or two if that's the one you're going to go with, and go with them at that point. Because anybody that's pressuring you into giving them money to go to a wrestling school, you probably should not give them any money at all. Because people who have been in the wrestling business, like Dory Funk Jr., Harley Race, Larry Sharp School, even though Larry Sharp passed away, Monster Factory, those type schools are not going to pressure you into giving them money. They'll say, here it is, here's what it costs. We don't give a damn whether you got good credit, bad credit, no credit. There's an old saying in the wrestling business, if you don't pay, you don't play. So they don't give a crap about your credit. They don't give a crap where you live, what you've been through, nothing like that usually. Tommy Dreamer, by the way, House of Hardcore also has a wrestling school. That just came to mind. I didn't write anything down. I'm just talking from the heart, people, so give me a break. I just seen not only Freight Train, but many others in my life give their money to a wrestling school, and then their money's gone, and they supposedly finish the wrestling training, and nobody in the wrestling business gives a damn about them after they get out of the school, and they go on these independent shows, and they make between $5 and $20 or more sometimes, and less sometimes, and you never hear about them. So all I'm saying is find somebody who you've heard of before, who you can train with, because if Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk, Harley Race, the Monster Factory with Danny Cage, because Danny trained under Larry Sharp, I said that a minute ago, are always going to have good equipment. Some of these guys that you never heard of before might be cheaper in terms of dollars and cents and that type of thing, but they're not going to have the best equipment, and they're not going to have the connections to get you booked. And some of these people are shady. The wrestling business is full of people that will smile to your face and stab you in the back. So if you don't have a thick skin, don't bother to get in the wrestling business. And if you're going to get in the wrestling business and make fun of the wrestling business, like $5 wrestling and Jake Manning, Man Scout Manning and all that, and make fun of the wrestling business, and yeah, Jake, I'm calling you out, should you ever hear this. And if somebody could forward this video to Jake, I'm okay with that too. It helped me out. The wrestling business is a privilege. It's not a right. You don't have a right to get in the wrestling business. It's a privilege to get in the wrestling business. So either be passionate about it and do it right, or don't do it at all. But back to other issues. $5 wrestling was a little funny at first, but the more you watch it, the more you discover that Jake, who ran $5 wrestling through his boss at High Spots, Mike Bachicchio, and by the way, I spent 38 years in Charlotte. I know Jake Manning. I know Mike Bachicchio, or Bachicchio rather. Sorry, I mispronounced it. Bachicchio wrestled in Mexico for a little bit of time, so he has wrestled, not just the owner of High Spots. I'm not sure where Jake Manning's wrestled, but most people ain't heard of Jake Manning, except for being the executive producer of $5 Wrestling. As Jim Cornette would say, a shitty show run by guys that couldn't wrestle their way out of a paper bag. Now, that doesn't mean I'm bashing Freight Train. Freight Train's not speaking to me right now, but it's because I told him, don't spend your money to do another independent show as a promoter and use $5 talent. Because if you only can afford $5 wrestling talent, and if any of you have seen $5 wrestling, you know $5 wrestling sucks. It's not that good. It's with people you've never heard of before, and they make fun of the wrestling business. But even those couple of people there that don't make fun of the wrestling business, Jim Cornette was right. They can't wrestle their way out of a paper bag. So what I'm getting at is $5 wrestling and High Spots are making fun of the business in one sense, but yet they want you to buy their DVDs, buy their wrestling rings, buy their other merchandise, buy their boots and stuff like that. And most of their stuff's good quality, but I can't see spending my money to buy something from High Spots unless it's a DVD that I can't get anywhere else. Spend my money to a company that purposely makes a joke out of the wrestling business. Because what did I say a couple of times in this video already? No one, I don't care who it is, no one can guarantee you a job in the wrestling business. That is not a guarantee. Yes, the better you are and the more you can play the part, the more likely you are to get a job. But that still doesn't guarantee you a job. So that goes back to be careful who you give your money to. There's a lot of shady characters in the wrestling business, just like any other aspect of life. But Jake Manning and High Spots and Mike Pacheco and those people have consistently made fun of the business. They have Charles Freight Train Stevenson getting up there and rambling and about people that don't even work for the company. And Charles mispronounced words. Like one time he said like Jake Mandy instead of Jake Manning. And actually, let me correct myself, it was more than once. He said it a bunch. And instead of them correcting him and saying, Charles, you can't do that, it's Jake Manning, not Jake Mandy, they would purposely let the video go on and then just use it as a way to laugh at him as another piece of comedy in the wrestling business. Well, a lot of people get mad at what Jim Cornette says about people making fun of the wrestling business. But people like Jim Cornette and many others made a living treating the wrestling business with dignity and respect and defending the wrestling business at a time when the wrestling business was perceived as real, even though it wasn't. They defended the wrestling business. They got into fights about the wrestling business. They protected the business at a time when the business was supposed to be protected. Nowadays, everybody knows everything about it. And even some of those that think they know everything about it, they really don't. But those that actually do know everything about it spend a great deal of time protecting it and defending it so that you would buy a ticket to come back and see it. Even WWE's business is down. Their house shows are down. The pay-per-views that they still have are down. It's not only on WWE Network. The WWE Network subscriptions are up a little bit, but all across the board, except for maybe the WWE Network subscriptions, everything else is down. If WWE didn't have that $170 to $180 million TV rights fees that they get from NBC Universal / USA Network, WWE would be in some serious trouble. And I realize this is my first video, and you might say, well, I don't know about you, guy. Maybe you're not telling the truth. Well, if you don't believe me, go search some of Dave Meltzer's videos. He talks about the dire decisions that are being made with WWE. Go search War Corps 666 here on YouTube, or his new channel, Dave Nadahl, N-A-D-A-H-L, I think is how you pronounce it. That's War Corps. He was just War Corps first, and now he's Dave Nadahl. He talks about the dire need of WWE and things like that. But what I'm getting at is I don't have any respect for people who don't have any respect for the wrestling business. And if you don't have any respect for the wrestling business, do us all a favor and stay the hell out of it. And lastly, I would appreciate any comments, positively or negatively, about this video or any videos that you might see from me coming up in the near future. I would like for you to email me, and my email is Rusty, R-U-S-T-Y, dot, my last name Loudermilk, L-O-U-D-E-R-M-I-L-K, at yahoo.com. I'll answer your questions. Give me ideas on what other videos you'd like to see. I'm trying to build a fan base here. But if I can skip back, sorry I'm going all over the place, forgive me. But back to the wrestling school. Just be careful who you give your money to. And also remember something else too. You might get into wrestling school and discover wrestling's not for you, because everybody can't be a wrestler. I'll give you a good example. Former NWA, WCW, and WWF referee Tommy Young, real name Tommy Machlay, M-A-C-H-L-A-Y, is a friend of mine. And Tommy started out as a wrestler in the 1970s with the old IWA, International Wrestling Association, promotion that had Johnny Powers and Bulldog Brower and all those guys that eventually went out of business. But my point is, Tommy started out as a wrestler and discovered, well, he isn't going to make it as a wrestler. So as fate would have it, one night somebody didn't show up and they needed a referee. Tommy said, oh, hell, scratch my match. I'll go out and referee. And he went out and refereed and came back to the dressing room. And all the people that were there, I wasn't there. I didn't know Tommy at the time. I didn't meet Tommy till the late 70s, early 80s, after he started working for Jim Crockett Promotions, NWA, based out of Charlotte, which was my hometown at the time, because for the first 38 years I lived in Charlotte. And for the last 10 years I've lived in Pittsburgh. So that is when, just by chance, Tommy Young became Tommy Young and discovered that he was a better referee than he was a pro wrestler. There's also backstage agent work. There is timing the show out backstage. There's setting up the ring, taking down the ring, taking down the sets, and things of that nature. So you can find a career in the pro wrestling business, but you don't have to be a pro wrestler, because there's millions of people already out there trying to be a pro wrestler. And I'm no Terry Funk. But if you continue to crowd the business with people trying to be pro wrestlers, there's only so many spots within the big companies to be a pro wrestler. But they always need somebody to take down the ring, set up the ring, get it to the next town, set up the sets, the lights, the technical equipment, things of that nature. For those of you who are in TV or radio production, they always need somebody, well, I won't say always, but most of the time, need somebody to work on the production technical side of it. So think about those kind of things as a backup plan. Being a pro wrestler is a wonderful career, but it's not a guarantee. So maybe some of you will have to go into those other areas that I mentioned instead of being a wrestler. Also, before you make a decision to be a wrestler, you might want to realize if you do make it to the big time, you're going to have to be gone maybe 200 to 300 days a year. Are you going to be able to do that if you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, family, whatever it is you have important in your life? Are you going to be able to make the sacrifice to do that? Are they going to be able to make the sacrifice and stay with you? The divorce rate in pro wrestling is high. I don't know the numbers, but it's a very high situation, because how can you have a relationship with somebody if you are on the road 300 days a year or more? So you have to think about that too. But please, if you get in the wrestling business, don't be like $5 wrestling and Combat Zone Wrestling and Backyard Wrestling and whoever else is out there. Stop making fun of the business. It's a privilege to be in the wrestling business. It's not a right. It's not a rite of passage, okay? You have the right to vote. You have the right to decide your partner in life. You have the right to decide whether you want to work a job or go to another job or whatever. But you don't have a right to be in the wrestling business. Being in the wrestling business is a privilege. So if you know it's a privilege, don't make fun of it. If you've got to make fun of the wrestling business, do us all a favor and stay the hell out of the wrestling business. And on a personal note, to anybody at High Spots $5 Wrestling, Jake Manning / Jake Mandy / Caleb Conley. Oh, by the way, that brings up another point. I was going to close this out. But before I bring up this other point, all the guys that helped to make $5 Wrestling this comedy routine, Caleb Conley, well, I shouldn't say all the guys, most of them. Caleb Conley, Cedric Alexander, Colt Cabana, because it was Colt Cabana and Marty DeRosa on commentary. And get some of the $5 Wrestling DVDs from High Spots if you can waste $5 to see that shit. And you'll see Colt Cabana and Marty DeRosa as commentary. But the point I'm trying to make is all those people, once they started getting serious about the business, you now see them making money. Cedric Alexander is making money in the WWE. Caleb Conley is making money in TNA, Global Force Wrestling, Impact Wrestling, whatever the hell they're calling themselves today. Are they making a lot of money? Probably not. But they're making more than they did before. Mike Baticchio, as I said, has wrestled over in Mexico under a mask. And Jake Manning has wrestled, but by Jake Manning's own admission, he's interested in a comedy career. Well, hey, Jake, if you want to go to a comedy club, that's where comedians work. Comedians don't work in the wrestling business. And I don't give three shits whether you like me or not. And in coming videos, I'll explain more about that. But anyway, I thank you for listening. Remember, if you go to a wrestling school, give your money to somebody who is not going to take advantage of you. So, and let me close with this. Just because a wrestling school might be nearby your home geographically, may not be the best school for you to go to. Because, as I said earlier in the video, any wrestler can get a wrestling ring off the internet or wherever they get them, and can get a wrestling school and rent a building, office space, whatever, and make a wrestling school. But that doesn't make them a wrestler that's going to be able to get you booked. If you're trained by a Dory Funk Jr., a Terry Funk, a Bubba Ray Dudley, Bully Ray, as some of you might know him. If you're trained by the Wild Samoans, they have a school now, I think in New York or Pennsylvania, one of those. If you're trained by somebody like that, you're more likely to get booked than if you're trained by some guy you've never heard of before, who just happens to have a wrestling school and you go give him several $1,000s because he's only a couple blocks from you. That's stupid, so be careful with your money. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you got any questions, please email me. I'll put out another video in a couple of days. I thank you for listening. Please email me and subscribe. I'll put out some more videos. I'll try to be more positive, but one last time, $5 wrestling sucks, and High Spot should be embarrassed for doing that. And for those of you that like Jim Cornette, I consider Cornette a personal friend. I consider the Crockett's friends from back in the day, even though I don't talk to them much anymore, and various other people that I know in the wrestling business, which is why I don't like anybody who makes fun of the wrestling business. So, fuck High Spots and fuck $5 wrestling. I'll put out more videos in a couple of days. Thank you, and have a good day.